I've just completed the final data review process for my PM 2.5 data, and I am ready to review my meteorological data. Since meteorological data is not pollutant data, there's a separate section of the form that you need to work from to do the final data review process for your MET data, and that's this bottom section here. So if you cannot see the whole section, scroll down in your screen. Now we can see the whole section, and we need to begin by making selections in the selection boxes in the order specified. So first I select my site ID, and that's S46 for my meteorological data. My sampler ID is INMET. The sampling year is 2013. And for meteorological data, what you need to do is that you need to review each parameter separately. So for example, you need to do the data review process for your ambient temperature data separately. Then you need to do your relative humidity. Then you need to do your precipitation. So I am going to start with temperature data. So I'm going to select ambient temperature in this drop-down box. The date and the time range is automatically populated by the toolbox depending on the sampling year you selected and where your MET station is located at and what you have imported into the toolbox up to this point. So since I've only imported one MET data set into the toolbox, this date range and time range corresponds to that data set. If you had imported multiple data sets into the toolbox for 2013 and you only want to look at a specific data set, you need to adjust these ranges. Now that I've made my selections in the selection boxes, I can begin reviewing my data by using these buttons. And I have the same options I did for my continuous pollutant data. I can either view all data, and that's including the flagged and the unflagged data, or I can only view the flagged data. So I'm going to start with just looking at the flagged data. So I'll click on the View Only Qualified Data button, and that brings up this query. And notice that for MET data, it's possible to see flags in the qualifier field that do not pertain to the selected parameter. So in this example, there are flags of OWS and OAT. So if I look at the table on the last page of the SOP, I see that OWS is for out of range wind speed and OAT is for out of range ambient temperature. The OWS flag does not pertain to my ambient temperature data, but the OAT flag does. So I'm looking at my values here, and the ambient temperature says 9,999 degrees Fahrenheit, and since climate change has not yet raised our ambient temperatures to 9,999 degrees Fahrenheit, these values are definitely errors and need to be invalidated. There are only 4 records here to invalidate, so I can easily do this manually, but again, you have the option of using the automatic invalidation technique that I showed you for PM 2.5 data if you have many records that you need to flag. But to do this manually, I am going to first click in that first row and click in the invalidation code column of the first record, and then click on the drop down arrow and find the appropriate invalidation code. I'm going to select machine malfunction, and that first value of 9999 is now invalidated. For the next 3 999 records, I am going to use the keyboard shortcut technique because I want to use the same invalidation code. And so I'm going to click in the next record. And remember that the keyboard shortcut is Control and apostrophe, and they need to be pressed at the same time on your keyboard in order to copy the value from the previous cell into the cell that your cursor is now on. So I'm going to press Control apostrophe. Control C would be a copy. And then I'm just going to use the down arrow key on my keyboard to go to the next record and do the same thing. Control apostrophe on my keyboard. And again, Control apostrophe. And now I've invalidated those 4 9,999 degrees Fahrenheit records. So I can close this query by clicking on the lower X button. And I can move on to the next parameter. For my particular MET data, I only collect 4 different parameters. So I don't collect barometric pressure, dew point, internal temp. I do collect precipitation. So since that's the next one in the list, I'm going to go ahead and click on precipitation. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to click on the View Only Qualified Data button first and see what happens. Okay, so in this particular example, I don't have any flagged precipitation data. So there's nothing that I can do review further because I haven't flagged any of my precipitation data. So I click OK on this message box, and I'm going to move to my next parameter. So I click on the drop down arrow in the parameter box, and let's see what I have for relative humidity. So I'll click on view only qualified data, and again I get that there are not any flagged relative humidity data within this range, and there's nothing for me to review with my relative humidity data since I didn't flag anything. So I'll click OK on that, and I move on to my next parameter, and the next one that applies to me is wind speed. So I'll click on that, and then I'll click on the view only qualified data button, and this one actually does have some qualified data in it, and those were the wind speed values that are negative 999. So those are definitely errors, and just keep in mind that for meteorological data, you need to add an invalidation code for each parameter. So the invalidation code is blank, even though I already assigned invalidation codes to my ambient temperature data. I'm now in my wind speed data, and I need to assign an invalidation code to that as well. If I didn't, these would get submitted to AQS as valid data, even though they are not valid data. So it's important to go through each MET parameter and assign invalidation codes when necessary. And again, since there's only 4 records that I need to invalidate, it's really easy for me to do this manually. So I am going to go ahead and click in the invalidation code field for the first record that I need to invalidate, and then I'm going to click on the drop down arrow and select machine malfunction. Again, remember that there's a vertical scroll bar, and if you're not seeing the code that you need, use the vertical scroll bar to find the codes you do need. There's lots of different codes. And then I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut again. So I'm going to click on the down arrow button on my keyboard, and I'm going to do Control and apostrophe to copy the value from the previous cell into the cell that my cursor is currently in. So Control apostrophe and then the down arrow, and Control apostrophe again and the down arrow, and Control apostrophe again. So that completes the invalidation of the flagged wind speed data. So I can close my query by clicking on the lower X here in the top right corner of the screen. So I've now gone through the 4 MET parameters I have and completed the data review process for the flag data. And I record in my database logbook that I completed the final data review process for my MET data set spanning 8/8/2013 at 8 a.m. to 8/22/13 at 7 a.m. And I record that I invalidated 4 ambient temperature records and 4 wind speed records due to out of range values. I've now completed my final data review process for each of the 3 data files that I imported into the toolbox. So I am done with this form. So I can scroll up here to see the top of the form, and I can click on the exit form button to close this form, and I'm back in the continuous and MET data fast track form. And since I'm done working with the toolbox for now, I can click on the exit form button here also, and I can go ahead and close the toolbox by clicking on the X button in the top right corner of the screen. And now we'll talk about your homework for this module. And the homework is to make a backup copy of your toolbox and then use the final data review and invalidation SOP as your guide and complete the final data review process for your imported data. Then zip the backup copy of your toolbox and email it to your instructors.